Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, let me once again thank the President of the General Assembly for joining the OIC in co-convening the first ever commemoration of the International Day to Combat Islamophobia. I also welcome you all to this historic event. The observance of this day serves to reinforce our shared commitment to raise awareness about the insidious phenomenon of Islamophobia and advance mutual respect and understanding and develop concrete measures to eradicate this menace. Excellencies, Islam is a religion of peace, tolerance, and pluralism. The Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, taught Muslims to treat everyone with dignity and respect, regardless of race, culture, gender, or religion. Yet unfounded phobia of Islam and its adherents is a sad reality of our times. This phenomenon is neither new nor an irrational bias held by a few, as so often portrayed. The challenge before us is much deeper and deeply rooted. Since colonial times, the entrenched notion that depicts Muslims and their beliefs as cultural others, threats, and have served to perpetuate, validate, and normalize Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hatred. Since the tragedy of 9/11, animosity and institutional suspicion of Muslims and Islam across the world have only escalated to epidemic proportions. A narrative has been developed and peddled which associates Muslim communities and their religion with violence and danger. This Islamophobic narrative is not just confined to an extremist, marginal propaganda, but regrettably has found acceptance by sections of mainstream media, academia, policymakers, and state machinery. Islamophobia is therefore being constantly fueled by structural discrimination, xenophobia, and negative stereotyping of Muslims and their faith. Excellencies, the tragic events in Christchurch and several other atrocities are a grim reminder that the tide of Islamophobia is sweeping across the globe. It is obvious in the manifestation of far-right and neo-fascist parties, in the open calls for the expulsion and exclusion of Muslims, in the politicization and censorship of the hijab, in the provocative burning of the Holy Quran, in deliberate defamation of our Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and the vandalization of Islamic symbols and holy sites. We should not underestimate the resentment and sense of injustice felt by Muslims in reaction to such Islamophobic acts. Their faith is a deeply personal issue for Muslims. The exercise of the right to freedom of expression carries with it responsibilities and obligations not to disseminate racist ideas or defame and ridicule religious symbols and religious personalities. And despite protestations to the contrary, Islam and Muslims are routinely linked to terrorism. In some cases, the rhetoric of hate and incitement to violence is officially inspired. Repeated pogroms of Muslims have been instigated by officially sanctioned neo-fascist policies and ideologies with complete immunity. The policies and violent actions of those who deny the right of self-determination of Muslim peoples represents one of the worst forms, one of the worst manifestations of Islamophobia today. Islamophobia has been whipped up in cyberspace. Digital and social media platforms are being used pervasively and systematically to spread hatred against Muslims and incite violence. This has unfortunately been the situation even during the COVID pandemic, when a tsunami of anti-Muslim hatred and Islamophobic narratives surged on digital platforms. At times, it appears that those who manage these digital platforms are sympathetic to the extremist anti-Muslim groups and ideologies. Ladies and gentlemen, despite its pervasive and widely documented manifestations, Islamophobia remains under-acknowledged, poorly understood, and less effectively countered. The dangers of Islamophobia often gain international attention when a heinous act of violence and terrorism strikes innocent Muslims, while the daily silent drip of discrimination, hatred, and hostility against Muslims remains largely ignored and underreported. Therefore, our resolve to combat Islamophobia must translate into concrete and practical action. To that end, we urge the UN Secretary-General to formulate an action plan in coordination with the Organization of Islamic Countries to halt and reverse Islamophobia. Such an action plan could include the appointment of a UN Special Envoy to combat Islamophobia, the adoption of international measures for the protection of holy sites, including the thousands of mosques and mausoleums which are presently under threat of destruction, the adoption of laws at the national and international level to outlaw hate speech, acts of vandalism of the Holy Quran, and discrimination and violence against Muslims and other communities, the provision of legal assistance and appropriate compensation to those subjected to Islamophobic acts, and the establishment of national and international judicial mechanisms and laws to hold those responsible for acts of Islamophobia accountable. Excellencies, unfortunately, the virus of Islamophobia is spreading faster than we have been able to react. Not even the greatest democracies are immune. We have witnessed democratic societies impose Muslim bans. So-called free societies allow for the desecration of holy texts and holy sites. And even my region is not immune, with democratic secular societies under the threat of being transformed into religious, nationalist, and Islamophobic states. The declaration of the 15th of March is the International Day to Combat Islamophobia by the General Assembly, and today's high-level event is a demonstration of global solidarity with both known and unknown victims of Islamophobia. Today, we must renew our resolve to build an inclusive society where different cultures and beliefs are celebrated and diversity is embraced. We can ill afford to ignore dangerous ideologies and acts dividing us as humanity. Let all of us, from any religion or creed, stand together in the fight against hatred, bigotry, and intolerance. I thank you.